Funding for Schaefer-Ellis is provided by
Squarespace, the sponsor of today's video. In all honesty, I never intended to make a George Miller ranking as my next director filmography video. I wasn't opposed to it, it's just the thought literally never crossed my mind. However, all that changed as I got swept up in the hype for Furiosa, his prequel to the iconic 2015 mega hit Mad Max Fury Road. Like everyone else, I was enamored with that movie when it came out, but I didn't want to just rewatch only it before Furiosa released. I wanted to finally check out the original Mad Max trilogy for the first time ever. You know, just out of personal interest. I have a life outside of YouTube. But then, I checked Miller's filmography and realized that the Mad Max movies made up 5 out of the 12 he's done in his entire career. At that point, I would be stupid to not just watch the rest and turn this into a video, right? So long story short, I breezed through not only the Mad Max movies, but everything else George Miller has made. And wow, I was not prepared for how weird this guy's movies are. I'd only ever seen 2 of them before, Fury Road and a certain dancing penguin movie we'll get to. And both of those are strange in their own special ways. But I thought the strangeness was just an exception and not the rule for this guy. Turns out, I was wrong. Nearly every one of George Miller's movies are completely bonkers, usually in the most delightful of ways. And I had a blast watching through most of them and seeing what wacky nonsense and incredibly unique filmmaking he would couple with premises that didn't seem like they would elicit that much craziness. And yet, they did. Don't get me wrong though, I don't just love George Miller's movies for being insane. I love them because they're both insane and masterfully constructed. This guy knows how to make a damn awesome movie. And he's conquered a variety of genres across his short, but generally outstanding filmography. I'm kind of in awe of everything he's accomplished, and I hope you come out of this video with a ton of recommendations for great films that you would have never checked out otherwise. I know I wouldn't have checked these out if I hadn't made this ranking, but I'm so glad I did. I know that was a lot of gushing, but with all that said, before we get to the really great stuff, there are a few duds. In particular, there are 2 awful movies I can't stand that drag his otherwise really strong track record through the mud. And if you've been around since my Best Animated Feature winner ranking in 2019, I think you have a good idea of what's coming. Let's get this over with. Disappointment in the game. Let me just stop you right there, actually. Disappointment in the game of life implies that I had any expectations at all of this not being an absolute piece of garbage. But I knew. I had never seen this movie before, but I knew there was an insanely high likelihood that it was a shoo-in for last place on this list. Because even though I had never seen it before, I have heard nothing but bad things about it my entire life. And I checked a bunch of articles ranking every George Miller film. From Screen Rant, the AV Club, Awards Radar, even aggregate sites like Metacritic, IMDb, and my mortal enemy, Rotten Tomatoes. And every single one of those lists had this film in the bottom slot. I think this is the most unanimously agreed upon bottom slot there's ever been in one of my videos before. But I still said to myself, well, despite the likelihood of me despising this film based on how I feel about its predecessor being extremely fucking high, maybe, just maybe, there's going to be a shred of enjoyability that spares it from last place. But as it turns out, I should have just trusted the consensus because this is exactly as bad as everyone has been saying for over a decade. Say hello to one of my least favorite animated films of all time. The one and only Happy Feet 2.
I knew it.
Alright, so it's hard for you to get the full scope of my feelings on this film without briefly touching on how I feel about the first one. So without spoiling too much, since obviously it'll be covered later in this video, I do not like Happy Feet. Like, at all. I've told this to friends and they've been stunned by this development. They tell me, hey, I liked Happy Feet as a kid. Well, that's the key here, isn't it? Yeah, you liked it as a kid. I did too. I love penguins. They're my favorite animal. I thought the funny dancing penguin movie was really good and stuff. Then in 2019, I watched it for my best animated feature ranking video, and it did not hold up to any of my adult sensibilities. So please do not comment on how disappointed you are with my position on Happy Feet unless you have actually rewatched it as an adult and can confirm it still holds up for you. If it does, then awesome, I'm glad you like it. But don't let your fond, nostalgic memories and nothing else cloud your judgment here. Remember, I'm not tearing into your childhood here, I'm tearing into my childhood. Because I really liked this movie as a kid. So how do you think I feel about the fact that I hate it now? But again, now's not the time to go into why. Now we need to talk about the sequel, which I never saw until it came time to make this video. Is it as bad as everyone says it is? Yes, obviously. Mumble has a son now, and his son doesn't like dancing. Oh, the irony! But he gets inspired by this flying penguin influencer, I guess. And he's so excited about wanting to fly and shit. He ran away from home with his little penguin buddies, one of whom is British. And it felt like I was watching Peppa Pig as a penguin for half the movie. It was unbearable. But Mumble starts bringing them home, and then they help this asshole elephant seal, and then they're still trying to get home, and I kept thinking, oh my god, please tell me this isn't what the whole movie is gonna be about. That sounded really boring. But thankfully, they finally got home, and I immediately started to wish that the movie was about them journeying home, because the actual plot was 10 times more boring. A big iceberg showed up, and it's blocking their home, so now all the penguins are trapped, and Mumble has to catch them some fish and find a way to break the iceberg. That's it. The entire last hour of this 90-minute movie is us being stuck in this one location as they try all sorts of ways to break this iceberg and nothing works. That's the fucking plot, are you kidding me? For all of its many faults that we'll get to, the first Happy Feet at least had some scope to its story. It felt almost biblical at times as Mumble journeyed to parts unknown and appealed to the human race in order to stop overfishing and find his place in the world. It was stupid and heavily flawed, but at least it was something, you know? Something unique and grand in scale that I haven't seen before. This shit is the most tired, boring, unbearably drawn out, trite garbage imaginable. Oh, maybe we can flag down the humans and get them to help. But then a snowstorm comes and they give up. Okay, that was a waste of time. Maybe the magical flying penguin can teach them how to fly. Oh wait, it turns out penguins really can't fly, and Mumble's son had a stupid, unachievable dream the entire time. Because this guy is actually a poffin, not a penguin. Wow, great. That was a waste of time. Finally, the movie remembers that the franchise used to be about dancing, because there isn't a lot of that in this movie. But then, Mumble remembers that he has Happy Feet, and they start dancing to break the ice. This nearly results in his son getting killed. Is the movie over yet? Finally, he remembers he saved that one elephant seal's life earlier, so he asks him to bring all his buddies to weigh down the ice. And the baby penguin sings an annoying opera song, and his voice is really annoying, and I hate this movie, I want to die! Happy Feet as a franchise basically only has two modes: boring as shit and extremely annoying. There is a secret third option, and that is the most unexpectedly epic thing you've ever seen. But that shit is buried underneath the mountains of mediocrity, and it barely ever happens. But returning to this movie, when it isn't horribly dull, it's just irritating. The Hispanic Robin Williams penguin, more on that later, is back, and more childish and unbearable than ever. He acts really creepy and stalkerish towards a girl penguin, and eventually she's like, wow, you were so persistent, but it paid off, and now I realized I should have loved you this whole time. Like I said, the baby penguins are annoying, especially the Peppa Pig one. This is an extremely minor complaint, but I don't understand how Noah the Elder is still around. Like, Mumble's parents both seem to be dead, but for some reason the racist, religious, fundamentalist penguin is still here and completely useless because he's completely on the side of the other penguins and he serves no purpose to the plot. Whatever, I don't really care that much. This movie came really close to being trapped in 1 out of 10 hell. Like, I cannot express enough how much I loathe it. But with that said, two things were actually not bad in it. First, I think this is pretty obvious to anyone who's seen the film, but there's a subplot where Brad Pitt and Matt Damon play gay krill who are on their own little existential crisis misadventure, and that was the best part of the movie for the vast majority of it. It's completely disconnected from the main plot and characters, essentially being this movie's version of the Scrat scenes in the Ice Age movies. But damn, it was the only time I perked up in the first 85 minutes or so. It's not even really that great or funny, but it was kinda cute, and I actually cared about the two of them. Congratulations, Will and Bill the Krill, played by Brad Pitt and Matt Damon. You two have the honor of being the only characters in the Happy Feet universe that I actually like. I'm not joking when I say that. Also, I can't be the only one who thinks they should have gotten Ben Affleck instead of Brad Pitt, right? Like, it seemed too obvious to pair Affleck and Damon together. Was he just busy? And now for the other thing I like. An inexplicable 10 out of 10 moments in a 2 out of 10 film. So, the Happy Feet movies are jukebox musicals, and most of the time when they sing pop songs, it's incredibly annoying, and I hate it. Sometimes it leads to some unintentionally hilarious moments when they pick a meme song, like when one of the Krill starts singing Never Gonna Give You Up, or the Puffin singing Numa Numa. That actually happens in the movie. I laughed out loud. But even though a lot of the non-meme song covers are good and well performed in a vacuum, none of them ever got me sucked into the actual plot of the film. Until this movie's climax, where they try to apply pressure to the iceberg in order to break it, and they sing Under Pressure. Haha, very funny. After I rolled my eyes at that though, something crazy happened. I actually started to really enjoy the scene. I love Queen, but it's not like the admittedly great cover of Somebody to Love in the first Happy Feet got me invested in that scene, but something about this one, just these communities of elephant seals, penguins, and krill beneath the surface, all coming together through song and dance to apply pressure to this iceberg, was just really powerful and awesome. The cinematography in these movies is admittedly really good, and the camera pans during the sequence make it come alive. That's not even mentioning the gorgeous lights of the krill, and the stellar vocals from both the baritone choir of elephant seals and Mumble's wife and son reaching out to each other through song. It's a genuinely phenomenal cover, and it adds to one of the best climaxes you could possibly ask for in a film like this. With that said, aside from that song and the gay krill, I hate every single aspect of this movie with a passion. I actually couldn't believe it was this bad, and I implore you to stay away from it at all costs. Even if you like the first movie as an adult, statistically speaking, you probably won't like this one. It's dull, it's stupid, it's comparatively scaled down, it's unbearable. Only now, after watching it, do I finally understand the meaning of George Miller's famous 100% real quotes. If you put a gun to my head and said you have to come up with a story for Happy Feet 3, I'd say shoot me. Like, I'm not memeing, that is an actual quote from him. This is not a joke. Look it up. After watching the second film, I completely understand what he meant, because there was no spark behind this dry, absolutely pitiful story. It feels like an obligation film through and through, which isn't really an applicable statement for most of George Miller's other incredibly inspired feeling works. The only Miller movie that even comes close to the supreme awfulness of Happy Feet 2
Happy Feet, Wombo Combo,
is Happy Feet 1. I hate this movie more than words could possibly express. And remember, that fact hurts me more than it hurts you. I think I have a pass to criticize it since it was a big part of my childhood. Like, I earned this right, sorry. I hadn't seen it since I watched it 5 years ago for the best animated feature ranking, but I honestly thought I was gonna like it more now that I'm used to and more appreciative of George Miller's wacky idiosyncrasies as a filmmaker. I thought, okay, maybe I'll admire some of the choices this film made a bit more. And after watching it again, I'm impressed. It's even worse than last time. What really differentiates this movie from similarly wacky George Miller films we'll get to, like Babe, Pig in the City, or The Witches of Eastwick, is the fact that the wacky elements of those movies are charming. When Happy Feet does it, it's the most annoying shit in the world. It's an endless barrage of pop songs sung by horribly ugly characters who are all aggressively sexual for some reason. Like, this has gotta be the horniest kids movie I've ever seen in my life. Unless you want to count Wizards, but like, as much as I love Wizards, I think if you show your kid that movie, you should be put on a list. Anyway, Happy Feet Wombo Combo. It occurred to me halfway through this movie that I didn't like a single character in it. Mumbo is an extremely boring protagonist. His Hispanic stereotype friends are annoying. His dad is a jackass. His mom and girlfriend are both extremely underwritten. Even the Robin Williams penguin is completely charmless. How do you manage to make a movie with a charmless Robin Williams performance?
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
Nothing he said or did ever made me smile. Oh wait, I forgot. Robin Williams plays two characters in this. Not only this weird love guru, but also one of the Hispanic penguins for some reason. I don't know. This movie is okay when it's just about Mumble struggling to fit in because of his passion for dancing and inability to sing. But then they try and equate interest in dancing to religious blasphemy, even though they did a piss poor job of establishing that this is a highly religious society in the first half of the movie. I guess there was the scene where Memphis drops the egg, but that could also be seen as just a special birthing ritual or something. Nothing after Mumble is born resembles rigid religious structures in the slightest. It's pretty much just sprung on you in a scene towards the middle, and it's like, wait, this is what the movie was about? Well, now it is apparently. On top of also being about climate change and the disastrous effects of overfishing. They try and weave that into the misfit penguin and religious zealot plot lines, and it's like, can you just pick a damn lane? The movie would be so much better if it was just about one thing and they developed it, instead of haphazardly shoving 3 things in there. Like, a movie about religious penguins getting their worldview shattered is an interesting concept, but it doesn't really mesh well with 50 pop songs getting sung back to back in the first half. The biggest travesty here is, despite how conceptually insane this movie is, a large chunk of it towards the middle is just so boring. Occasionally, you'll wonder why the penguins are so horny, or why the movie makes a sudden shift in terms of subject matter, but so much of it is just aimless dicking around until it's time for the next abrupt plot development. Then of course we have the ending, where Mumble is taken to an aquarium and everyone falls in love with his happy feet. This somehow leads to the governments of the entire world deciding to stop overfishing. And I know this is a dumb penguin movie for babies, but if they really wanted to go there and show live action politicians holding debates about this, I think it's worth mentioning that this would absolutely never happen. Governments would never shut down a lucrative capitalistic fishing enterprise for the sake of helping a bunch of penguins. They wouldn't even do that sort of thing to help people. Frankly, this is an insulting and dumb ending, and I hate this movie's guts. Not to mention, you don't even really feel the effects of the overfishing. The penguins just keep telling you there's no fish, but they never show any sign of them suffering or starving. At one point, one of the Hispanic penguins says, "Yeah, we don't have a lot of fish, but that's not gonna stop our party." So like, how am I supposed to take the lack of fish seriously as a plot point if nobody ever seems to be suffering from it? This movie sucks. It took some bold swings and is certainly unlike any kids movie I've ever seen before. And it has some positives, like some stellar looking environments and great song covers, particularly that Somebody to Love one. But I'm sorry, I will never understand how anyone can look at this and think, yeah, it's a good movie that deserved to win Best Animated Feature. To this day, this is the only Oscar George Miller himself has ever earned. Mad Max Fury Road won a lot of technical Oscars, but none of those went to him. He was nominated for Best Director for that, but he didn't win. Don't worry though, he's still Academy Award winner George Miller because of Happy Feet. Of all the goddamn movies it could have been for. I've really come to love and respect this guy as a filmmaker over the course of making this ranking, but no amount of awe and amazement at his other cinematic accomplishments can make me spare even a crumb of praise for the Happy Feet movies. I hate them. And like, I guess we could do that thing if you really want to make a video talking about why you love Happy Feet. I'll promote it on my community page if it's good enough. But this is just atrocious in my eyes. To the point where, in every way except the music, I'd argue Romeo and Juliet Sealed with a Kiss is a better film. Unironically, I mean it. I think that's all that needs to be said. Whew. Anyway, this is probably where a certain percentage of you are gonna click off the video since I've talked about all the movies you know about, but I highly encourage you to stick around to hear about the other highly accessible, sick as hell movies George Miller has made. Expand your cinematic horizons, why don't you? This will be very fun, trust me. So with that said, let's move on to the only other George Miller film I'm not too fond of.
This is the Thunderdome.
I don't even know where to start. I'm actually kind of speechless with this one. Oh, I know. Let's talk about the Ewok village. Growing up, I heard a lot of negative opinions about this bizarre, cutesy detour that suddenly takes place halfway into the third film in this trilogy. People have called it too childish, too boring, too not in line with the general tone of the previous two films to really work in this movie. I disagree. I think the Ewoks are responsible for a ton of funny moments. I don't believe they destroy the tone of the series, considering Star Wars has always been intended to be enjoyed by a younger audience. And more importantly, they still feel like a natural part of this world. They aren't that far off from the bizarre aliens in the previous films like the Jawas. They suit the story, and it's inspiring to see their rather primitive weapons take down the evil Empire. The Ewoks feel like they belong in Star Wars, and the encounter with them feels like it belongs in Return of the Jedi, even if the Jabba and Palpatine parts of the story are a little different tonally. So why do I bring all of this up now? Well, you see, every single negative thing I've heard about the Ewoks over the years, every single opinion expressing how much they suck and don't belong in the movie or the universe, I don't agree with any of that. But it is truly insane that every single one of those complaints 100% applies to Mad Max 3 Beyond Thunderdome. I sat there with the most dumbfounded look on my face as the series I got so invested in across every other installment took one of the hardest left turns I have ever seen a franchise take in recorded history. Everyone likes to say how crazy it is that George Miller is the director of both the Mad Max and the Happy Feet franchises. But after watching this movie, yeah, no, that checks out. This is a Happy Feet movie masquerading as Mad Max. It's abundantly clear that he didn't want to make these anymore, because only half of this film is worth a damn. And even then, it's not all that great compared to the first two. Max winds up in Bartertown, run by Tina Turner, who, I'm sorry, I did not find very convincing in this role. I have nothing against her, she's a great musician, but her acting just did not work for me, and I feel like this is an unpopular opinion, so sorry. Tina Turner wants Max to take out this asshole duo, Blaster Master, because the brains of this team, Master, has a really big ego from running the pig shit farm. So Max fights his subordinate Blaster in the titular Thunderdome, and I guess this is most people's favorite part of the movie? I mean, I suppose it is for me too, but even then, I don't think it's that cool of a fight. These bungee ropes they're attached to are creative in theory, but ultimately they just make Max look goofy as he jumps around this guy. I don't know, it's okay, but not great. But ultimately it ends when Max decides he doesn't want to kill this guy. See, I don't really know if at this point in the series, Max would be so soft and unwilling to kill in order to survive, even if this guy is mentally impaired. But he doesn't do it, so he spins a wheel to determine his fate. That's a pretty fun idea. Ultimately, he's sent off to exile in the desert. And at this point I was like, okay, maybe the movie is going to begin now. We are 45 minutes into a Mad Max movie with no car chases in it, and the only action scene being a goofy bungee jumping fight. Is something really cool gonna happen now? So remember when I talked about the Ewoks? Max is brought to a green village full of tree children who are descended from the survivors of a plane crash, who believe him to be the fabled captain who will fly them to Tomorrow Morrow Land. I'm sorry, wait, what movie am I watching? Suddenly, the bleak, offbeat, insane tone of the series is gone. And instead, we find ourselves in a cutesy fantasy world populated by annoying children that I don't care about. None of them are likable, charming, or interesting. An issue which is only compounded by what a bizarre tonal shift this is for the series. It does at least flesh out the universe and show a different side of it that's much less brutal than what we expect. So that's worth something, I guess. But at what cost, man? It makes for such an absolute tonal mess. It's like someone took the VHS tape of a Mad Max movie and accidentally recorded over it with a worse version of Hook. Oh, sorry, let me explain that one for all the youngins. Back before we had DVDs, we watched movies on these black rectangle things called VHSs that you had to manually rewind and fast forward with no option to instantly skip to a certain scene. They obviously have a lot of nostalgic value, but let's be honest with ourselves, they fucking sucked and were a pain in the ass to use. Media consumption peaked with DVDs and Blu-rays. All of this is to say, I don't like Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome very much. The third act brings the two halves of this movie together and has Tina Turner and her goons going after after the kids in a pretty cool train chase scene, I guess. But in no way is this chase scene superior to the action in The Road Warrior, or even the first Mad Max film. It just feels comparatively sauceless. Emphasis on comparatively, because it's definitely cooler than your average action scene, but as both the climax of and the only chase scene in a Mad Max film, I expected more, honestly. And then it all culminates with the kids escaping after Max makes a sacrifice play. He's surrounded, there's no way he's getting out of this, and then Tina Turner just lets him go after he destroyed her town and her entire operation. I guess she was just really impressed with him doing that, so she doesn't shoot him. This is the stupidest movie I've ever seen in my life. At least based on what I was expecting from it. Mad Max has always had a lot of goofiness, but that was all sprinkled on top of the inherent coolness and grit each of these other movies have. Every other film in this awesome saga is a perfectly balanced concoction of the rawest and the silliest shit you'll ever see. With this one, they took that concoction and halfway through the baking process, they spilled an entire container of silliness all over it, resulting in one of the messiest kitchen disasters I've ever seen in my life. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't think it's a terrible movie. It's just not a good one by any stretch of the imagination. Even if you like the stupid kid stuff, I don't know how you could possibly justify it coexisting alongside the Thunderdome half of the film. It has some cool elements, I like the concept of Blaster Master as a character, and the climax is pretty rad. Plus, I mean, on some level, I do admire it for taking such big swings. But I don't think I'm gonna get a lot of pushback for saying this is the only bad Mad Max movie. I've come to really love this series, but my love for it can only extend so far. Let's watch a movie. So, this is the first documentary I've ever had to include on one of these movie rankings. I don't know, man, this is weird. What do I even say? 40,000 Years of Dreaming is not the prequel to 3,000 Years of Longing that I expected it to be at first glance. Rather, it's just George Miller taking you through the history of Australian cinema and playing a bunch of clips from various Australian movies. It's kinda cool, but also not really presented in a compelling or enticing enough way to not make it feel like schoolwork. I don't know. I learned some cool information and it's a great way to get film recommendations, but very little from this documentary is actually gonna stick with me. I suppose if you're curious, the doc is available for free in its entirety on Vimeo, and it's only 67 minutes. Could be a great way to learn about a region of world cinema that I don't see a lot of people talking about. I wrote some of the movie titles down and I might check them out when I get a chance. Man, I don't know. This is not the sort of film that's really in my wheelhouse to talk about. I didn't have a bad time with it, but it's pretty average and unexceptional, all things considered. Still, like I said, it's free on Vimeo, so give it a watch if you feel like it.
Come forth, my djinn!
3,000 Years of Longing is the only film George Miller made in between Fury Road and Furiosa, and it could not be more different than them. While they focus more on visual storytelling and eschew an excessive amount of dialogue, this film is coated with dialogue and embarks to express just how powerful verbal and written storytelling can be. Tilda Swinton finds an Idris Elba genie, and instead of immediately making a wish, she listens to him tell stories of the follies of his previous masters and himself. For a while there, this is kind of an anthology film that presents various short stories that make up the titular 3,000 Years of Longing. Gotta be honest, I was really gripped by this format. Just hearing Idris's smooth, silky voice recounting all of these cautionary tales, gripping in both their concepts and their execution. There's so many brilliant little directorial touches, from sound effects to transition into another similar sound as the scene changes, to a sequence where the djinn is invisible to the world and so we don't even see him, just his distorted, ethereal POV. So many abstract mythical concepts are presented in such visually stunning and compelling ways. And there are a lot of great little touches within the narrative that enhance the message about the power of stories. Such as a sultan who went mad due to war, only being able to find contentment when an old man tells stories to him. It's a good reflection of the power of art as escapism. Unfortunately, where the movie starts to unravel is when the djinn stories stop and the lady listening to all of them begins making her wishes. I don't necessarily have an issue with the direction the story goes in. More so, it's just how weirdly rushed it all feels. The lady sees the djinn suffering and immediately makes the morally correct choice at the expense of her own happiness. And it just doesn't feel natural or believable. Like, you'd think she would try and find some sort of other workaround to this, or even move somewhere else to make it work. It just doesn't feel compelling or dramatic from a narrative or character standpoint. It's like she just immediately does the thing that'll fix this, and it makes it seem like she didn't even care about him that much. Maybe she didn't though. It's possible because, unfortunately, my other issue with this chunk of the film is that I just don't believe the chemistry between them. It comes across as really awkward, which I don't know if that was the intention given the position Idris Elba's character is in, but it left me feeling a bit cold emotionally. Like, surely I should have felt more passion from her, I don't know. And then there's the ending, which, I'm gonna be honest, flat out sucks. It's cheap and makes no sense, and I don't like it at all. This is a movie with a great premise and structure, and I was really sucked in by the first 2/3 of it. But ultimately, it feels like something was missing from that last third. There was an idea there, it just seems like it needed to be fleshed out better. Good movie, but not George's best.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
So I assume most people in my generation got into the Mad Max series through Fury Road. And if that's your first impression of what Mad Max is, tonally and setting-wise, I cannot stress enough what a shock to the system watching this first movie is for the first time. It's just so normal. You call this a post-apocalypse? There's a functioning diner in this movie and a bunch of other normal businesses. Seems like you can just live a quiet, normal life without much pushback. Sure, there are biker gangs to avoid and it's relatively chaotic, but like, again, compare this to Fury Road and you can imagine my shock. But with that said, it's honestly a really cool setting and time period to start the series off in. Most post-apocalyptic media takes place, post-apocalypse. But the first Mad Max is an interesting glimpse into a world that's just starting to fall apart. It's a pretty cool contrast compared to the rest of the genre, honestly. And overall, yeah, I had a great time with this original film. Seems like my opinion of it is more positive than most people who just tend to say it's okay. But yeah, I think it's really good. It's a pretty simple story about a gang of bikers who get in Max's grill after he takes down one of their members. But I remains pretty invested, hoping his buddy Goose, as well as his wife and child, would make it out of all the precarious situations these biker freaks cooked up. I don't want to say what happens, but like, if you know anything about Mad Max, you probably know he's a loner. Gee, I wonder what could possibly happen to his family. This movie is great at baiting you into thinking, oh, this is it. They're not getting out of this one, before surprising you with the sheer number of situations they get out of. All of this remains gripping thanks to a ton of great visual and editing touches, accompanied by a killer score. I got really excited when I saw in the opening credits that Brian May did the music. Like, holy hell, the guy from Queen? I didn't know he did film scores. Yeah, it turns out he didn't. This was a different Brian May. But still, good job, other Brian May. I think the biggest issue with this movie, though, is the pacing. See, I didn't find myself bored at any point, and I think the build-up to Max going mad was riveting. The problem is, once he does go mad and vows revenge on these bikers, there's only 20 minutes left in the movie. Yeah, it kind of feels like they ran out of budget, or else they would have made the third act longer. This definitely feels like it should have been a 2-hour movie that got cut down to 90 minutes. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know the budget for this film was insanely low. Like, it cost less than $500,000 to make and ended up grossing $100 million, ultimately landing it as the most profitable film of all time for a while there. As a result of its limited budget, they only had one take to get all the car crashes right, and they nail them every time. There's not a lot of action in this movie, but what is here is fantastic. Though, obviously it's more of a precursor of what George Miller will accomplish later on. In spite of its early installment weirdness, I think the original Mad Max is great. It would be a fantastic directorial debut, regardless of the knowledge that it was made on a relatively shoestring budget. But knowing that it was made me respect the hell out of George Miller so much more. Also, I won't spoil it, but that choice Max gives the last guy is one of the rawest things you could ever end a movie on. Fantastic stuff. But obviously, the maddest Max is yet to come. Hey, do you ever think about how in the Mad Max universe, they probably don't have websites anymore? That's a terrifying thought. Thankfully, we have Squarespace to keep the world as we know it fully functioning. Let's hear about how they do it right now. Squarespace is an amazing online website builder that enables you to create beautiful websites for your business or personal hobby. Start a completely personalized website with the new guided design system, Squarespace Blueprint. There are so many professionally curated layout and styling options you can use to craft a unique online presence tailored to your brand or business, and optimized for every device. Easily launch your website and get discovered fast with integrated, optimized SEO tools, so you show up more often to more people and grow the way you want. Running a business is so easy with Squarespace thanks to their simple but powerful payment tools. Accept credit cards, PayPal, and Apple Pay. And in eligible countries, offer customers the option to buy now and pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay. These seamless checkout options allow you to easily sell exclusive content on your site. And so does the ability to add a paywall to sell memberships or courses, or sell files your customers can download, like PDFs, music, or ebooks. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/ShadeForAList to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
That'll do, Donkey. That'll do.
Sorry to be such a heartless jerk, but I absolutely could not get into Babe. You know, the movie about the pig where the guy says, "That'll do, pig, that'll do." It's just so standard, I don't know. A cute series of vignettes about a pig at a farm. It's got a nice little message about doing whatever you want to do, regardless of what people say your role in society is. I think it's a nice enough movie for what it is. But like, this was a damn Best Picture nominee? Are you serious? Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Supporting Actor, James Cromwell? What planet am I on where this is a movie that deserved all those nominations? Like, what? I'll give them art direction as a nom, and the only Oscar the movie actually won, visual effects, is fair enough as well. But like, if you wanted to open up a slot for a family-friendly film in the 1995 Best Picture lineup, I don't know, Toy Story was right there. I really don't get the hype with this film. Like, I can kinda see how E.T. became so beloved and iconic, even if I don't agree. But Babe is just such a standard, okay movie that I've barely thought about it at all since I watched it. I would go into more detail on why that is. But here's the thing. Babe is not actually a part of this ranking. Because even though George Miller co-wrote and co-produced the film, he did not direct it. However, I wanted to watch it in order to get context for the sequel that he did direct. Babe, Pig in the City. And I'm gonna be totally honest, this movie blows the original out of the water completely. It's so fucking good. I really wasn't expecting much because I already didn't care for the first film, and that's the one that was showered with critical success. But wow, is the second one being slept on. It is completely different tonally than the original, but I think the reason that works here, and not in, say, Mad Max 3, is because the original already had an inherent whimsy and silliness to it through the use of talking animals. The story was very grounded, but hearing the animals talk made it fantastical. Well, this one decides, what if we put those fantastical talking animals into a fantastical story? And it works so well. This film is simply insane and way more cartoony and fun than the first one. After an accident, the James Cromwell farmer is put out of commission for the entire movie. It would have been really funny if he just died in the first 5 minutes. But oh well, I'm glad he didn't. But then they find out that the farm is being closed down. So the farmer's wife figures in order to get money, she better take Babe to a big sheep herding demonstration or something. Honestly, it doesn't matter. This is ultimately just an excuse to get the pig in the city. And the production design is simply outstanding. It's a neat hodgepodge of all sorts of major cities. There are canals like Venice, but also a shot where you can see the Eiffel Tower, Statue of Liberty, Hollywood sign, and even the big Jesus statue, all right next to each other. That's simply wacky, and I love it. Babe meets a bunch of monkeys and joins their monkey circus with this clown guy. But then the clown guy dies literally the next day, and all the animals at this animal hotel need to fend for themselves and find food. But then Babe becomes the leader of the animals and introduces communism to them. Then the lady monkey gives birth to the little baby monkeys, and they all sing really loud, but then they sing so loud that animal control shows up and takes them all away. And the scene goes on for like 10 minutes, and it's like the saddest fucking thing I've ever seen in my life. But then the farmer's wife dons the dead clown's outfit and she tries to rescue Babe after he rescues all the animals, and the clown pants get really big and she bungee clown jumps around this charity gala like it's the Thunderdome again.
That's true.
That's like 100%. Everything you said was true.
I'm gonna be honest, there's no way to describe this movie without sounding like an insane person. It constantly went in increasingly loony directions, and I was simply captivated by it the entire time. It has such a distinct, wondrous energy to it, and it never gets boring. Yeah, you can kind of see where some characters, like the monkeys, could have been fleshed out into antagonists who oppose Babe's compassion and optimism before getting won over in the third act. But ultimately, who cares, man? This movie is awesome and unhinged and baffling, and I love everything about it. I'm glad I watched the first film because that really tempered my expectations and made me think this would be another cutesy, normal movie. Turns out nothing about this movie is normal, and I am here for it. A murderous shadow lies hard across my soul. That is a quote from Babe, Pig in the City, 1998. A dog says that line to a pig in this movie. If that's not a ringing endorsement that'll get you to go check this out, I don't know what is.
The heat of revenge. It's revenge, and it's best served cold.
And now we come to Miller's latest. The genesis of this entire ranking video existing in the first place. Furiosa. Shout out to the guy at the Cinemark who recognized me. You seem cool. I will say, my friends and I went into this movie with absolutely no expectation that it would top Fury Road. We all kind of understood that that movie was a once-in-a-generation sort of deal. And we didn't need this to be another action masterpiece on the same level. Just a worthwhile and compelling prequel in its own right. And I'm glad we adopted that mindset going in, because this is absolutely not another Fury Road. Nor is it trying to be, thankfully. It doesn't bombard you with constant balls-to-the-wall action and goofy epic one-liners, though those are still in the movie and as great as ever. George Miller clearly hasn't lost his touch. They're just a lot more sparse, since this movie, while obviously borrowing a lot of Fury Road's aesthetics, is aiming to be something much more somber and tragic. It's like a feature-length version of her scream scene in Fury Road. Seeing every single person Furiosa loves get taken away from her in this movie enhances that movie's sad elements immensely. And turns out it's all thanks to Chris Hemsworth of all people. Ooh, that little bitch. He might honestly be my favorite Mad Max villain out of all of them. Perfectly straddling the line between being a threatening menace and an eccentric, pathetic, goofy weirdo. He steals every scene he's in, and it might be the best performance I've ever seen from him. I mean, I've only ever seen him as Thor before, but like, he's better in this than the Thors and Avengers and stuff. I don't know. There's only really 2 major action sequences, but they're absolutely stellar, inventive, visceral, heart-pounding works of brilliance. And unlike, say, Thunderdome, the story is actually interesting enough to make up for the relative lack of action. I liked getting to actually see locations like Gastown and the Bullet Farm, getting to witness the squabbles between Joe and Dementis' factions, as well as seeing how Furiosa worked her way into Joe's army. Her relationship with that other driver was subtly compelling, and a great source of tension considering he wasn't in Fury Road, so you do the math. It's also clever how they keep you guessing with the fate of Furiosa's arm. I assumed someone would cut it off to get the map, but it subverted my expectations, which was cool. I also think the climax was by far the best part of the movie. I expected it to be a big, action-packed finish, and when I saw what it actually was, I felt like an idiot for ever wanting this to end with a huge action scene, because yeah, this was somehow way better and more tense. I ate that shit up. It was so satisfying. Overall, I think this is a pretty great movie, though it definitely isn't without its problems. I think the pacing is probably the biggest issue for me. Like, we spend a lot of time with Child Furiosa, and I'm not against that on principle, except a lot of those scenes don't revolve around her. She's in the background as Dementis does his thing. It's not a giant problem, because Dementis is a great character, but it feels like it takes a while before Furiosa is really focused on. I find it odd, too, that we barely establish what her life is like in the Green Place before she gets taken. It's strange how that feels a tad rushed, while some of the Dementis stuff feels a little dragged out. There's a lot of discourse about this, so I just want to make it clear that I don't mind the use of CG in this movie. I just think some of the CG shots were not blended very well, and took me out of it a little bit. I don't know why that was, but nothing like that ever happened in Fury Road, so I don't know if it was a stylistic choice or what. I guess it's not really my place to question the mastermind behind Happy Feet 2 though, so I'll be quiet. Overall, Furiosa is great. A more than worthy addition to the Mad Max saga, and an amazing revenge thriller in its own right. It's crazy that Miller is still making Mad Max movies nearly 50 years after his first. And against all odds, they're somehow still this good. You can see a lot of pieces of the original trilogy in this one. The first film's revenge plot, the gates of Gastown being reminiscent of the fort from the second film, the green place resembling the Ewok village from Thunderdome. But despite these small similarities, this is very much its own thing. A worthwhile, brutal, excellent film that's well worth checking out.
The Bitches of Eastwick, because he's just so clever.
Wow, what a great addition, Jimmy.
If you haven't figured it out by now, one of the greatest attributes George Miller has as a filmmaker is that the man is fucking insane. You go into his movies with a certain set of expectations, and he will deliver some of the most batshit ridiculous concepts and scenes any big budget filmmaker has ever attempted. A cute animated movie about a dancing penguin? It's about global warming and religious hypocrisy now. A cute movie about a pig going to a city? Here's some of the rawest dialogue and most tragically shot scenes that come from a dog and a bunch of monkeys getting caught by animal control. And then there's The Witches of Eastwick. I didn't really expect much out of this movie. I mean, from what I could gather, it was about these three ladies getting it on with Jack Nicholson. And I kind of assumed the witches thing was just a metaphor. Like, they weren't actually magical witches, people just called them that. Yeah, it turns out they are magical witches, and they inadvertently summon the man of all three of their collective dreams to town. And he's not like other guys. He respects women and makes that clear constantly. Yeah, so as you can imagine, this guy is full of shit, and things go wrong as time goes on. The plot is pretty simple. It's a feminist story about these three realizing they don't need or want this guy in their life. But what really makes this film as f***ing nuts as it is the way these supernatural powers these four exhibit come into play. None of them are ever explained. They just happen. The four of them will be playing tennis, and suddenly the ball will just slow down, out of nowhere. A musical instrument will just catch on fire from being played too hard, and nobody reacts to it. Because it's a visual metaphor, I think? I honestly don't even know. The climax involves the three ladies making a sort of voodoo doll. And it's like, when did they learn how to do that? Did I miss that scene? I have no idea, and yet it just works for the bizarre, surrealist vibe the film is going for. I don't care how these powers work. I just want to see cool, freaky shit. And this movie delivers on that. The performances are all really strong. Susan Sarandon and Michelle Pfeiffer are great, while Cher really commands the scenes she's in. But with that said, yeah, it's the Jack Nicholson performance that completely steals the show here. It's kind of like Ryan Gosling Ken, in the sense that it's a feminist movie, where the problematic man character is ironically the highlight. His initial extreme confidence and inexplicable swagger in the first half, giving way to such a truly unforgettable, unhinged, maddening man-baby performance. He gives this monologue towards the end of the film that, no joke, might be one of the best comedic monologues I've ever seen in a movie. He just nails it. Speaking of the end of the movie, I have to admit, as ridiculous and corny and overblown as a lot of scenes in the first hour and a half of the movie are, I didn't really think it was peak George Miller looniness. I was having a great time with this film, but I kept thinking, yeah, this is good, but is it Babe Pig in the City levels of good? Then the climax happens, and I'm gonna be honest, this was one of the most gleefully insane things I've ever witnessed based on what I was expecting. I had a vision in my mind for what I wanted to happen, and I kept thinking, this isn't gonna happen, but wouldn't it be cool if it did? And then it f***ing did! I'm not gonna spoil what I'm talking about, I wouldn't dare, but oh my god, it was the perfect punctuation to one of the most fun and bonkers third acts I've seen in quite some time. What a picture. I highly recommend The Witches of Eastwick. It goes to some batshit insane levels that I wish more adult comedies weren't so afraid of reaching. It's a great time throughout, and even if the rest of the movie wasn't great, it's all worth it to see Jack Nicholson in his prime chewing the scenery in the way only he can.
Is that character actress Margot Martindale?
Lorenzo's Oil is the weirdest George Miller movie in the sense that it's the only one he made that isn't weird. I mean, I guess there was that documentary, but real talk, that barely counts as a piece of his filmography. Every other one of his narrative features has some sort of bizarre element to it, either in the story, the characters, the visuals, the costumes, what have you. The closest thing to a normal movie he made besides this is probably the first Mad Max, and even that has silly biker gangs and a man's eyes basically popping out of his skull. But Lorenzo's Oil is just a straight up medical family drama about a little boy dying from a degenerative disease and his parents rapidly trying to find a cure. There are a couple directorial touches reminiscent of Miller's usual style, and not all of them really fit, but they're also very sparse. For the most part, this is a straightforward drama film, and it's honestly kind of fantastic. Gripping, emotionally devastating, absolutely outstanding work on display here. The film is paced pretty briskly and frequently flashes forward months or even years to get to the next medical development. But it doesn't feel rushed because not only is there a lot of ground to cover, but you have plenty of scenes to just sit with the family's grief and Lorenzo's suffering. It elicits nearly every emotion you would want to come out of a story like this, and it absolutely made me cry quite a few times. I will admit, Nick Nolte's Italian accent was maybe a tad bit silly and took me out of some scenes, but it's not that bad. Susan Sarandon knocks it out of the park on all fronts, however. I really bought her bitterness and devastation at every turn. Oh, and in case you couldn't tell from the number transition, character actress Margot Martindale is in this. Yeah, I mean, that's all I have to say about that. She's pretty good, but not in that much of it. As a dramatic piece, I think this is absolutely fantastic. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that as a biopic, it apparently unfortunately suffers in retrospect from the real events in the decades since the film's release. In real life, Lorenzo was never fully cured of his affliction. He lived to the age of 30, which was far beyond what any doctor predicted. But since the movie came out in 1992 when he was 14, it obviously doesn't tell the whole story. Which, how could it unless Miller waited decades to make it? The ending is inconclusive, yet optimistic about future trials with Lorenzo's Oil. But ultimately, there have been mixed results regarding its effectiveness, and it certainly isn't a cure. It's worth considering if this newfound knowledge and perspective damages the impact of the film. But in my personal opinion, it doesn't. As long as the viewer remains informed and understands that this is not a miracle cure in real life, they can appreciate this harrowing story and the incredibly effective portrayal of it on film. There's nothing in the movie that really indicates this is a miracle cure. It's left open to future studies to figure that out, and I appreciate that. In the end, this is simply an outstanding, often horrific drama that is very much worth watching. Even if it doesn't feel like George Miller's handiwork, it's absolutely one of his best films.
Once you've established the road, you and your child can enjoy the road.
Mad Max 2: The Road Warrior is exactly what I expected going into the original trilogy, while only having knowledge of Fury Road. It's a lower budget, less stylized version of it, which nonetheless has all the thrilling filmmaking sauce you'd come to expect from someone on George Miller's level. It feels a lot more confident and more assured of what it wants to be than the first film did. The pacing is absolutely perfect, and the title character is by far at his coolest in this film. I love his demeanor, his line deliveries, the synergy he has with this adorable yet vicious puppo. It's such a shame Mel Gibson is, Mel Gibson, because he has such blinding charisma in this film. Most of which is completely absent from Thunderdome, but I've talked about that movie enough. Seeing the progression of the apocalypse compared to the first movie is really interesting. Like, the roads are still there, but every other semblance of the old world is kinda gone. Replaced with brutal leather daddy gangs and forts constructed of repurposed car parts. I found myself really growing attached to this ragtag group of stragglers Max encounters, and hoping they get out of this okay. The kid especially is such an effective anchor for both the story and for Max. And he doesn't even speak. In fact, he's a little feral. But man, the stuff they conveyed with him without any words hooked me so much more than those stupid ass kids in that other movie. Okay, we're not, I'm sorry, we're not talking about that one anymore. The boomerang scene is pretty sick. But my favorite thing with this kid is just that small scene where Max gives him the little music box that plays Happy Birthday. Like, I can't get that out of my head. It's such a beautiful, tender little moment in the midst of all the chaos and insanity in this movie. I didn't want any of these guys to die, but this kid's safety especially got my heart beating super fast during the ending action sequence. Speaking of which, the action is not only way more frequent in this movie compared to the first one, but it's so much more engaging and exciting as well. Top-notch stuff. Obviously not the best in the entire franchise, but by 1981 standards, it's pretty mind-blowing, and the pulse-pounding score enhances every action beat immensely. Oh, and as if all this wasn't good enough, we even get Helicopter Guy. I like him because helicopters are awesome, and I like how he has a small helicopter and he flies around. I think that's pretty epic. He has a really fun dynamic with Max, too. And I think it's pretty clear that this is what inspired Nux in Fury Road. They start out as enemies, only to become mutual partners in the midst of all this insanity. And despite of how little Max actually cares about him, he keeps coming back to help and save him. It's so enjoyable. I just couldn't get enough of this guy. I did find Max's attempt to leave and subsequent tussle with the gang to be a bit rushed, and I don't quite understand how someone as injured as he was perfectly fine driving the truck in the final battle, but these are pretty minor issues. Overall, a stunning achievement, one of the best action movies out there. For a really long time, the crown jewel of the Mad Max franchise. Obviously, times have changed in that regard, and yet, I don't think this movie has lost too much of its luster. It's still fantastic to come back to, or watch for the first time like I did. Even if you don't like the first Mad Max very much, the second is extremely worth your time. And then you can watch Fury Road and Furiosa afterwards. Nothing happens in between. Much like how Happy Feet 2 was pretty much the unanimous bottom spot on every other George Miller ranking I found, every single one of them also happened to have the exact same top pick. The movie he made immediately after Happy Feet 2, as a matter of fact. And yep, I'm not about to be a contrarian on this one. Mad Max Fury Road is by far George Miller's magnum opus. His absolute greatest film ever. It really is one of the biggest filmmaking miracles of our time. Having a 70-year-old return to his franchise that he hadn't made a new installment of in 30 years. And inexplicably, against all odds, create the most balls-to-the-wall, insane action film that puts that original trilogy to shame. This would be like if instead of Crystal Skull, Steven Spielberg inexplicably came back with the most batshit, violent, adrenaline-filled Indiana Jones film that put the intensity of Temple of Doom to shame. Nothing about this film's existence and sheer quality makes any sense. But then again, as we've established throughout this ranking, nothing about George Miller makes sense. The man is operating at a level so fundamentally apart from every other director working today. You can almost always count on his movies being insane in one way or another. And in this way, that happened to be insanely godlike and brutally visceral. To this day, this is the only film George Miller got nominated for Best Director for. On top of the movie itself receiving a Best Picture nomination for a goofy, grimy action film. The Academy nominates blockbusters for Best Picture pretty frequently these days, but this is the kind of blockbuster that probably would have given the older members heart attacks. I'm still kind of in awe that they gave it the Best Picture nomination it totally deserved. Alright, let's actually talk about the damn film itself now. There's not much to say that hasn't already been said, but I'll try my best. What I love about this film is how it throws you into this insane world and doesn't feel compelled to explain a lick of it. Furiosa obviously fills in a couple gaps, but if you take Fury Road on its own, it throws so much insanity at you. There's a cult of war boys with white paint all over them, and then they spray shiny chrome paint on their mouth when they're about to die so they can make it into Valhalla. Why is that a thing? Why do they do that? Who gives a shit? It's cool. Who exactly is a Morton Joe? Why does he have that weird mask thing? Who gives a shit? He's awesome and he's the bad guy. That's all you need to know. Why is there a flaming guitar man constantly accompanying Joe's fleet of drivers? What purpose does that guy possibly serve? Say it with me now. Who gives a shit? It's the most awesome thing ever conceived in history. This movie doesn't care one bit about trying to orient you in this world. It's on you to get on its level. And the reason this works so well is because of how inherently simple the plot and universe is. Joe has a bunch of slave wives, Furiosa's trying to get them out of there. That's all the reason you need in order to get sucked into some of the most crazy action and awe-inspiring moments you'll ever experience in any blockbuster. That's on top of the sheer amount of ridiculously memorable quotes this movie throws at you. Oh, what a day! What a lovely day! Witness me! You arrive at the gates of Valhalla, shiny and chrome. I live, I die, I live again! Mediocre! I am the scales of justice! How the f*** are you not watching this movie right now? Oh my god! I also love how the movie gives everyone solid characterization without getting bogged down in it. Each of the wives has a distinct personality compared to the others if you pay attention. Beneath Furiosa's battered and intense exterior lies a hopeful heart that gets crushed once she reaches her destination. You feel like Max has healed somewhat from the trauma of losing his loved ones by helping Furiosa complete her mission. Honestly though, after multiple rewatches, I think my favorite character in the entire film is Nux. His interactions with Max are incredibly fun. He gets the mediocre scene, which might be the funniest part of the whole movie. But most importantly, his arc of rejecting the leader of the cult he was born into and finding genuine purpose in not only helping the wives, but finally seeing them as people rather than objects, it's just fantastic. His fate is inevitable, I suppose, but it feels so worthwhile as his life went out in service of a greater cause. Obviously, the main course of this film, however, is its non-stop action. And yeah, non-stop is a bit of an exaggeration. There are slower scenes to catch your breath with. But it just feels non-stop since the entire movie is the chase. The tension is kept consistently high, and as much as I enjoy the slower scenes, particularly the nighttime ones with the gorgeous blue color palette, the movie is very clearly at its best during the adrenaline-fueled, magnificent car battles. They are genuinely awe-inspiring. And to be totally honest, I think the sandstorm scene might be my favorite action scene in any movie ever. The part where the war boys get sucked up into the sky as somber music accompanies the vivid red clouds and flashes of lightning. Simply unreal. How do you even make that? And at the age of 70, no less. Movies are such a miracle, aren't they? There are a million reasons to adore Mad Max Fury Road. I could go on all day praising this movie to Valhalla and back. But I think you get the picture. Truly transcendent. Just as good as everyone has been saying for years. If you haven't seen this movie yet, literally what are you doing with your life? Go watch it now, it's peak. So that was my George Miller ranking. And out of all the director filmographies I've looked at so far, I think this is the one I'm most happy that I made. That's because everyone talks about Wes Anderson, Spielberg, and Nolan, and I had already seen most of their most iconic works, so I had a good idea of their contributions to filmmaking as a whole. But George Miller is an exceptional filmmaker that not many people talk about in comparison to those other three. A crying shame because he might have the most interesting and diverse body of work out of all of them. Hell, out of any director working today. The only thing one George Miller movie has in common with another is that they are entirely batshit, often in completely different ways from each other. And yet, they also display a true mastery of the medium that so few directors I've seen have ever achieved. I don't know where this guy went to film school, but more people need to go there, clearly. Wait, what do you mean he went to medical school? This man is a licensed doctor who just did film on the side until it took off? And he's this good at it? You know what? Considering how ridiculous and nonsensical his movies are, that fact checks out, honestly. Also, despite being famously Australian, his parents were apparently Greek immigrants? Greeks stay winning, baby! Okay, I could read some other cool facts from his Wikipedia page, but I think this is the natural end of the video. Good night, Wasteland.